Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel, Dr. Coco's Medmonics. Today I'm going to be going over a couple of ethical concepts. I'm probably going to have to do a couple videos on ethics, but these are just a couple that I found to be not only like showing up a lot, especially on UWorld, but I found them to be really hard. And so I'll go through a couple of these concepts for you guys. First, like, when can you break HIPAA? And I'm not talking about like actually breaking HIPAA, but when I read a question and it says like you're sharing some type of information, in my head I'm like, oh crap, am I breaking HIPAA or not? And like, I don't really understand like when I can and can't like share information. Sometimes it can be hard and you think like maybe you're in a gray area or something. First is, so say you're a physician and a patient comes in and they threaten to kill someone else. And they're like, oh, like I hate my boss, he's awful, and I have plans of like taking a gun and killing my boss or something crazy like that. And they tell you this, not only do you have an ethical, but you have a legal responsibility to inform the individual at harm. And when I first got these questions, I was like immediately thinking, oh, you just call the cops and they deal with it, but you actually have to inform the individual first, and then you have to inform law enforcement, but you have to make sure that you inform both of them. Depending on if you're looking at UWorld or Kaplan or MUME, they all have like different orders, but I trust UWorld the most, and they say inform the individual at harm first and then law enforcement. Next, if you have a patient with HIV, syphilis, something that could seriously harm a sexual partner, and they refuse to tell their partner. And so I'm talking specifically about things that can cause long-term issues. So obviously HIV is something you live with the rest of your life. Syphilis can become like secondary, tertiary syphilis. So you definitely want to inform their partner so that they can start treatment. This is one I just assumed that you would go to the health department, but that's not what you do. Even if it says in the question stem the patient refused to tell their partner, the answer is always going to be first, try to exhaust all efforts to get that patient to tell them themselves. Because you would rather them say it to the partner, right? You would rather be like, hey, I gave you HIV or something. So even when the question stem says they refused, always put the answer choice that says try and convince them otherwise. And then if they still refuse, and so they said in the question stem they refused, you try it again, you were like, please tell this person that you gave them HIV, and they still refuse. I've even had a question stem that said like they refused and they said, oh, and I'll sue you if you tell them. Well, you have a duty to warn, so you still have to tell that person. And usually the answer choice will be that you contact the health department, and they specifically have people at the health department that do contact tracing, and so they would have somebody call that partner, but they specifically cannot say, oh, Joe down the road gave it to you, but they say, you have been exposed to HIV, you should go get tested. But make sure before you put that answer choice, you always go with exhaust the efforts to get them to tell them first. Next, you have a patient that has a genetic disease and refuses to tell like their kids or ex-wife. This is what I've actually had a couple of times where they specifically said like they had a genetic disease that was fatal, and if you tell my ex-wife or my ex-husband about this, I'm gonna sue you. And every time I read that, I'm like, oh crap, okay, I'm not gonna say anything, right? Because I don't want to get sued. But you still have, again, that duty to warn. So this is when you would obviously first try to exhaust efforts to get them to tell them. And if they still refuse, then you have to go and inform the ex-wife, the ex-husband. And then if the kids are adults, you can tell the kids as well. But usually in the question stem, it's like a bad divorce situation that I keep getting, and it's children. So then you'd have to tell the ex-wife or ex-husband, whoever is their legal guardian that there's a genetic disease that they need to go get tested for. Next one, so say you have a patient with TB or some type of communicable disease that they can spread easily to others. Honestly, I'm not talking about COVID at this point. Definitely something more like TB. And they're not only refusing treatment, but they're refusing quarantine. And the specific question I remember was a bus driver who had TB and not only was refusing their treatment, but they were still going to go to work. And the answer ended up being you incarcerate the patient. And I definitely was not feeling that answer choice. And I was like, you don't incarcerate patients. I'm a doctor, not a cop or something. But incarcerating patients in the hospital is different than incarcerating them in jail. There's no legal sentence to this. This is just you incarcerate them in the hospital, meaning that you keep them in the hospital until you give them treatment. And in the end of it, the patient's privacy and autonomy is not there when public safety is at risk. So if you're worried about this patient giving TB to other patients or other people and putting safety of the public at risk, you have to keep them in the hospital against their will, unfortunately. Hopefully nobody out there ever has this happen. Oh, this is one, I swear. I get questions constantly about when you can and cannot give blood. And it's always talking about Jehovah's Witness. And sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. And it's really confusing. And I'm over here like, okay, ethically, legally, what can I do, right? So when can you give blood? If the patient is unconscious, period. End of story. I don't care what they have. If they have a shirt that says I'm a Jehovah's Witness, if they have a tattoo that says I'm a Jehovah's Witness, if they have a bracelet that says I'm a Jehovah's Witness, I don't care. If they are unconscious, you give them blood. Because if they have a t-shirt or whatever tattoo and it says that they're a Jehovah's Witness, that does not count as a consent or a denial of blood products. Because not all Jehovah's Witnesses believe in that. So you cannot use that as a form of not giving them blood. So period, end of story. They're unconscious. No matter what age they are, you give them blood. You have a patient comes in, they're unconscious, and their family and friends are like, oh, they're a Jehovah's Witness, and they don't believe in getting blood products. And you're thinking, wow, okay, friends and family are in there. They would know this person, right? I don't care. They're unconscious. You give them blood, period, okay? There's only one exception to this rule, and that's if they were conscious, said, don't give me blood, and then they passed out. You can't be like, oh, well, I didn't hear that, okay? So if the patient is unconscious, period, and they have never told you, I don't want blood products, you give them blood. And then if the patient is a child, you give them blood. All emergency situations when it comes to a child, you do whatever necessary to save that child. If the parents come in and say, oh, we are religious, we're Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever, we don't believe in blood products, oh well, like tough titties at that point, you give it child blood, okay? And this goes not only for giving blood to a child, but any life-threatening diseases. And so I always get this question where it's like, oh, you have a kid and they have like a stiff neck and a fever and you're really thinking meningitis, and then the mom's like, no, I'm gonna go home and give them like, I don't know, I'm gonna put a ruby on their wrist and then they're gonna be cured. No, that's not gonna happen. If you think that this child has meningitis, you keep them in the hospital. I don't care what the parents say, okay? These are questions that I get constantly where you like think that this person this child has meningitis, and the parents like, no, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna give them like eucalyptus or some shit. No. Keep them in the hospital and treat them for meningitis. You give them, or you do the lumbar puncture to try and figure out if they have meningitis, okay? So if it's a child, emergency situation, you give them blood. If it's life-threatening disease, you treat them. And you don't care what the patient's parents say, okay? And that kind of brings up if the patient is ever in like an emergency situation, whether they have capacity or not, you still treat them with whatever you think is going to save their life. So, as the medical provider, whether you're a doctor, nurse, whatever, well, it's going to be a doctor that makes this decision, but you do whatever in that emergency situation, whether or not they have capacity. And last quick one I want to go over is like if a patient has depression or not, and when you treat them. And so say you have a patient with a terminal illness like Parkinson's and they want palliative care. And you're thinking, okay, they have Parkinson's, it's a terminal illness, there's not really like anything we can do other than treatment, there's not a cure. So palliative care seems like a fine option, right? But then somewhere in the question stem, it gives you that they are depressed or they're showing signs of depression. You don't give palliative care, even though you're thinking like, this is probably a good next step for this patient, right? Palliative care, but they're showing signs of depression. You do a psych eval. You do not give palliative care if they say in the question stem they are depressed or shown signs of depression. And then if you have a patient that is suicidal and they need some type of procedure or surgery and they're refusing consent, what do? And you're thinking, well, this person is suicidal, they don't want to live, they're refusing consent, like, should I really force this on them? And you do. Because they attempted suicide, you assume that they have depression or something else psychological going on. So they are no longer considered competent of their medical decisions. And so you do the surgery or procedure or whatever it is to save their life. And last, this one, pretty obvious, but when we put on our white coat and we took the Hippocratic Oath, we said do no harm. So no matter what, you never help a patient die, whether it's Dr. Kevorkian going in and trying to euthanize patients because they're terminally ill, or if you're working in a prison and they want you to be involved in an execution, you cannot do any of that because we took an oath to do no harm. So you cannot euthanize patients, you cannot help in the execution of a patient in prison, and if they're being executed, you cannot even be the one that's like pushing a button or something. You can't even do something that simple. You cannot get involved. I don't know why these show up. It seems very like niche, but yeah, so here's a couple of concepts I've been tested on a lot. And if you've come across any other ethical things, you can comment at the bottom and I'll make a video for it. Hopefully this helps you, and if it did, please like and subscribe to my channel.